My presentation is of the traditions of the church, the experience of Anglican priests leading liturgical change. Well, and like Dave said, change is something that is super easy and that everyone loves, especially Anglicans. So it's been a great time studying it. Um, so my research question was, what is the experience of an Anglican priest leading their parish through a change in its liturgy? This change could refer to really kind of any broad scope of things, whether it's a change in the lectionary, a change of the kind of ceremonial, high church to low church, or vestments, anything like that, to the service book used, whether it's from the Book of Common Prayer to the Book of Alternative Services, or the other way around, or to something else, or to some mix of them, and even hymn books. The experience of the priest was determined through interviewing priests who have led their parish through such a change in order to hope to determine some common threads and important factors in the experience. So in the experience, I'm looking from why they did it, to how the parish and the diocese reacted to the change, to the outcome of the change in the parish, but most importantly, what the experience was like for the priests amidst all of these motivations, processes, and outcomes, how it actually affected the priest as a human being and a minister. My theological motivation, I included this in the title of my presentation, with the prefix of the traditions of the church, comes from this article, one of the article 34 of the 39 articles of religion, which is one of our standard doctrinal statements in the Anglican Church of Canada. And this statement motivates the study, saying, "It is not necessary that traditions and ceremonies be in all places one and utterly alike. For at all times they have been divers and may be changed according to the diversities of countries, times, and men's manners. And every particular or national church hath authority to change, ordain, and abolish ceremonies or rites of the church ordained only by man's authority, so that all things be done to edifying." So this doctrine has been kind of central to the Anglican Church as it's processed through its many changes in its liturgies. I first became familiar with the 39 articles, and they become central to my theology when I started discerning a vocation to the priesthood. It was the first thing my priest did was said, "Read the 39 articles and this commentary on them, and come back to me and give me your interpretation and opinion on them." So, so that was a good start. And also, of course, this article has been used a lot to justify things. This was in the original Book of Common Prayer in England to kind of justify the changes from the Latin Mass to an English service. It's included, printed in the back of our 1962 Book of Common Prayer. And this article explicitly in these passages are quoted in the rationale section at the beginning of the Book of Alternative Services, which is now kind of our most popular service book as the reason for that has done these changes. My academic motivation, well, when asking this question, what is the experience of an Anglican priest leading their parish through a change in its liturgy? There's actually a lack of directly related literature, but there's an abundance of peripherally related literature in this field of research. Even to broaden the question to any denomination, what is it like for a minister to change the service or liturgy in a church, doesn't bring up much. This shows an area of want in this field of phenomenological research related to ministry and liturgy, and provides a good justification for the pursuit of my research question. As I said before, there's an abundance of literature on related topics, and Dr. Sinnes mentioned that as well. But there's not been a lot about the experience. So this is a topic of interest, we know, because people have been researching and wondering about change in church and change in liturgy for quite some time and have written ample volumes. It also shows that there's an underlying issue with this question, which is around the reality and inevitability of change and the fact that it has profound impacts on us as human beings. And it is something that is widely perceived, that is, that change happens and that it's hard. And it continues to be grappled with and relevant in research fields and daily lives. The research around leading changes in organizations is abundant. Even within fields of leading churches through change, there is ample research, and it is still a relevant and ongoing subject of interest. There's also lots of documentation of liturgical changes within Christianity, and specifically Anglicanism. And these engage at theological and sociological levels, but not much of it actually deals with the experience itself. And so that was my academic motivation for undergoing this study. My personal motivation comes from the fact that throughout my training here at AST and in the discernment process with the Diocese of Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island, I have served in the breadth of liturgical styles within the Anglican Church. I've served in parishes that use the Book of Common Prayer and high ceremonial, such you can see me preaching in a pulpit, wearing a dalmatic, raised up from the congregation, and I've served in places that do not use authorized Anglican liturgies at all, and use things such as the Northumbria liturgy, Iona liturgies, the New Zealand prayer book, the whole range of things. And you can see me there also preaching in a very kind of casual setting where I'm down on the ground, I'm in my normal clothes. So in my experience of being in all these places, I became aware of the fact that these all at some point have changed. Of course, the Anglican Church of Canada, having inherited a pretty specific way of worship, that being kind of the way of, Victorian era England, Church of England, with colonial settlers coming over and bringing with them the Book of Common Prayer. And since then has changed in a variety of ways. So I began to wonder, what has it been like for this change to happen? So my research is qualitative. All the research in this Festival of Learning, or at least for the grad projects, is qualitative. But that's important because in this study, I had to make that clear, that I wasn't measuring, although it was a question I asked, I wasn't measuring, is change good? How, has it increased the congregation? These kinds of things, but rather I was looking at the experience. I was looking at the phenomenon, right? The experience of change specifically for the priests. And to do this, I interviewed 5 priests. And I would like to make clear to you, and I made clear to them as well, this study was not about whether change is good or bad, or what kind of change is best. And I put a note there, I'm not interested in the liturgy wars that happen both in our denomination, and you can see it in other denominations as well. But just the reality of the fact that liturgical change is happening, and what is that experience like for just good faith priests living in the experience that they've been given. So my research, it's important to note that all the priests I interviewed, these 1 through 5 stand for my priests, 1 through 5, I've numbered them. Despite one of their requests, I didn't give them cool names. But all of them come from unique circumstances within their parish. For the first one, the parish was in decline. It was at risk of being shut down. And part of this was due to it had inherited a very high Anglo-Catholic liturgy that was unsustainable kind of for its aging population. With the second parish, it was very busy. They had a variety of services on Sunday to the point that people, were coming out of one service while others were coming in and taking their spot to start the next service. And there was the creating an environment of stress, really, within the congregation. Another priest, their situation, they really attribute the change to COVID. The fact that when COVID happened, things went online, and online services look different than what in-person services look like. And then when things came back in person, there was a lot of carryover from that, and it kind of sparked the conversation of, well, do we need to do things the way we did them before? As well as a need for variety. It was a parish that kind of did the same thing every Sunday, like many parishes do. With the fourth parish, they actually found that there was too much variety. They struggled with bouncing back and forth between using Book of Common Prayer and Book of Alternative Prayer Book of Alternative Services one Sunday, as well as different hymnals on different Sundays. And they found there was a lack of identity as well. No one in the parish could really figure out, well, what kind of Anglican parish are we? And that became important for them as they guided through that. And then for the last parish, this was kind of a development of an ongoing trend. They had, over the course of years, continued to move to a really informal, a really casual, kind of contemporary kind of service. And they hired this priest specifically because they knew he did that even more. And they wanted to continue this development. So for his change, it was a development of what he would say an ongoing trend. Amidst all these unique circumstances, there were common threads in the experiences. The first common thread was that each experience started with perceiving a real need from the parish. For example, the first priest really wanted to focus on what is meaningful. They found that the parishioners were really devoted to keeping up the various rituals, the various practices that they had inherited, but were actually no longer finding it life-giving, but felt too guilty to let it go. And for her, she wanted them to really embrace, well, what is it that you want to do? We can do as much or as you would like to do, but it should be what you want to do, what is actually going to edify your faith. With the second priest, they found, like I said, that there was too much chaos from the three services back to back, and that this was really inhibiting the pastoral capability of the priest, and that she could not find time to talk with the congregants, to make relationships with them, which would then lead to further interactions in the week. And also, of course, that the community itself did not know each other. There was 3 congregations in one parish, and even the ones who attend the same service didn't have time to get to know each other's names. So there was a real sense of a kind of a pastoral crisis of a lack of a sense of community. And both of these as well, these first 2 parishes have in common of inheriting churches that were once very well attended, and as a result of that high attendance, that high involvement, were very elaborate in their ritual, in their liturgy. But as they, like many churches have aged and gotten smaller in this age that we're living with, found that to be unsustainable and needed to find a way to move into something that was more appropriate for them. This third priest recognized that first with COVID, the need to continue to still gather, and instituted online church, Zoom church, like many churches did, but recognized that through this Zoom church, through this kind of cafe style church they would run on Zoom, that there was actually a real passion for it that he had not seen before in the congregation, that they really enjoyed being able to have their cup of coffee with them in worship. They really enjoyed the kind of laid back style. And so when they gathered again in person, he brought it forward as, what if we don't go back to the same old thing? Well, we kind of adapt what we've been doing, because he felt that the church was very much stuck in a rut. It was the kind of congregation where it was frustrating for him because he didn't receive any feedback at all. People were just so content with the status quo that he didn't know one way or another whether he was doing a good job or if anyone was content. So when he saw just the slightest uptick in passion from something, he kind of jumped at that as a need for something to change. With the fourth priest, he found that there was a lack of identity in the church, with them alternating between Book of Common Prayer and Common Praise one Sunday and the Book of Alternative Service with Mission Praise the next Sunday. That there was this real, nobody could put their finger quite on, well, what is it? What kind of church are we? And he had grown up and through his ministry services served in kind of a variety of different churches, both on the one that was really rooted in an evangelical tradition and one that was really rooted in a Catholic tradition. And he really admired belonging to parishes that knew their identity and that used that as a strength to really bolster the faith. And so he felt it was in the best interest of the parish to help them to discern, well, what is it? What kind of parish do we want to be? And lastly, as I mentioned, there was the need for the parish of Priest 5 to really transform their liturgy to match their culture. They had a culture that was very laid back, very welcoming. They had already had a coffee bar that ran throughout the service, these kinds of things, but just that the service wasn't quite at the level of informality that actually matched the energy that people were bringing to it. And so he really wanted to align the culture of the people with what they were doing to close any kind of disparity. The second common thread then is that all this was done with a cooperative leadership style and relying on the communal authority. All of them really relied on the people, making sure that they are not pushing anything on the people without their approval, but actually they are bringing up what it is that people are bringing to them, what they perceive the people wanting. The first priest talked about that she would ask people what brings them closer to God. This was the conversation she was having in pastoral visits. What is it that we do at the parish that brings you closer to God? What is it we do that brings you further from God? Is there anything you'd like to do that we don't do that would bring us closer to God? And really wanted to focus on just shifting the liturgy to whatever is meaningful for them, because making the parishioners feel closer to God is what made her feel closer to God. And this parish did that in a very cooperative way in that they actually had a liturgy committee. So they had lay ministers, they have a large clergy team who sit on it, as well as wardens, parish council members who actually get together and vote democratically and debate what they will do in the liturgies as they develop them seasonally. With the second priest, she talked about that what she found most effective was coming to it with a humble attitude. She said, she used the phrase, don't carry a big stick. She found that in the church, in the past, there had been very authoritative priests. And while this would work because of a level of clericalism she talked about, people would simply go along with what the priest says. She wanted to use that herself, and she believed that there is a level of that is healthy, but that actually has to be used in a way of presenting it humbly, right? I am here as your chief liturgical officer. I am the presider, but I'm not here to enforce my will on yours, but rather I want to lead whatever liturgy is edifying to the people. And in this, she involved, once again, her lay ministers and her wardens in kind of discerning, well, what are we going to do? How many services are we going to have? Do you care if I wear a chasuble? These kinds of things. With the third priest, when they came into the cafe-style church and the kind of variety of church services, this parish actually went from just using one kind of typical book of alternative services, Eucharist on a Sunday, and it's a small, elderly rural parish, like many parishes, to having kind of a standard variety, I would call it, where each Sunday is something different, but it's that same every first Sunday, second Sunday, third Sunday of the month. And when bringing this forward, a lot of it, he said, actually came from his associate priest who had experience with leading liturgical change before. And a lot of it came as well from the musicians who had various ideas of things they would want to try. And so he would bring all this forward to the parish council and have it approved at the parish council. With the fourth priest, when kind of discerning what is this identity we want to have, he very much involved both parish councils, and this was a two-point church, the only two-point church in the study. And so he had to engage the parish overall, but actually each parish, each church individually. And part of this as well is he discovered that although there was a consensus on the parish level of wanting to have identities, the identities that the churches wanted to have actually communally became different for each church. So they went from both being churches that alternated services to one being a church that uses the Book of Common Prayer and one being a church that uses the Book of Alternative Services. And then with the fifth priest, he, when leading these changes in the parish to become more casual, to kind of become more experimental, first ran everything he did through the bishop. He was really active in engaging the bishop of that, especially because he had come from a previous Christian tradition before and didn't want to step on Anglican toes he might not understand, essentially. So going through the bishop and then coming to the parish council, he was very cooperative in instituting these changes. But he also was cooperative in the sense of he would really empower others. Rather than, I would like to mix up the preaching, it was more like, who wants to preach on the third Sunday of every month, right? And bringing that forward to the council, to the bishop. Hey, can this lay person start preaching once a month? So that it was actually coming up from the congregation. The third common thread in this was that it was actually a positive experience for all of them. This was the biggest surprise to me. I've heard stories of, a priest who put a plant in a different spot in the church, and the person would put it back in the old spot every Sunday, right? And I fully kind of expected to come into this experiment with people, being like essentially getting death threats or something for trying to change things, right? But all of them really actually describe the experience as being positive. Um, none of them reported any particular bad reactions, at least not on a communal level. There's always an outlier person who would kind of complain. Um, but that was usually due to some kind of pastoral need that needed to be met some kind of other way. Um, and as a result of these changes, of the ways that they had done it, where they had perceived a need, where they had done it cooperatively, all of them felt that they saw a positive impact on the parish, which then for them made it a more positive experience. They all experienced some level of rejuvenation, whether that's kind of just people more passionate about the liturgy, a bit of revitalization, such as that two of the churches at one point were at risk of closing and now were stable. And two of the churches actually saw growth, new people coming, and attributed to the fact that these churches had finally picked an identity and picked a liturgy that matched their culture. And so now it blended well into the community, and people from the community were able to come easier and feel more in place. The fourth common thread here, of course, is that positive doesn't mean easy. And I want to give a shout out to Sonia's presentation yesterday in that, clergy resilience matters for this reason. All the priests, despite it being a positive experience, did describe it as being tiring. And because it took a lot of time talking to people. It was positive because they talked to people, but it was tiring because they really made sure that everybody was on board with it. They also described this process as long. Although some started the change right away, it took a long time to implement it. Others took the approach of actually being in the parish for 5 or 6 years before deciding to implement change. And although the change went quicker once implemented, they felt that that time of building trust was really necessary before getting to that point. There was also a level of frustration around it, just in that even though they had instituted changes and it was positive for the people, I think many of them hoped to see more growth, more numerical growth than what occurred. And so there was a level of frustration about that. The fact that the churches, just weren't growing the way that, especially for one priest, that he had seen in the past when he had implemented these kind of changes at other parishes. The last kind of common thread here is that the priest's identity was core to all this. Although the changes were brought up from the people, were perceived based on their need, the priest's own identity and preferences really bounded that change, right? Each priest expressed that you yourself as the priest have to actually identify with this liturgy too, or you can't honestly lead it. You can't lead it in a way that is actually going to inspire the people to be in a relationship with God if you're up there moving through motions that you yourself don't connect to God with. And so while they all affirmed that, this change was natural for them, I think of, priest number 5, he said he believed one of his spiritual gifts was informality. So being hired for this role, he felt was very natural for him. The 4th priest himself preferred the Book of Common Prayer, so he was very happy that one of the churches chose that. But of course, was happy to lead the other church because his big thing was that he found it too hard to go through 2 different identities on different Sundays, but rather he could be to each church kind of what they needed him to be. And then with the other, with Preach 3, who instituted a variety of services, he himself actually felt a rejuvenation for leading liturgy now that he wasn't leading the same liturgy over and over again. And the first 2 themselves consider themselves much more low church than the parishes they inherited, and so we're happy to kind of to go down the candlestick, as we might say in that way. And for all this was very affirming of their vocation. The fact that they were able to help people really connect with God, for them, was fulfilling of their purpose that they had been called to that place. And especially priest 4 talked about gaining confidence in his ministry. Although he had done things cooperatively, he was the priest who probably was the most authoritative in saying, I'm the liturgical officer. And although he had discerned that it was their will, because there was a level of infighting and uncertainty about it, who actually went forward and say, this is what I've discerned is best, and we're going to do this, unless obviously you fire me or something. But the people embraced that. They were happy that he kind of stood up and put his foot down. And for him, he considered himself always a quiet person, not a very confrontational or authoritative person. So we found the fact that he was able to take this step with careful discernment, and to be affirmed by the congregation that they valued him taking that step. He found he gained a lot of confidence in all the rest of his ministry and pastoral visiting, funerals, everything like that. And the last thing about the priest identity as well is that although it did bound the changes, all of them expressed the fact that they came into the parish knowing that there was a kind of level of similarity between what they identified with themselves and what the parish identified with. And all, because I would ask them, do you recommend changing the liturgy to other priests? And they would all say, well, if that's what the church needs, and also expressed a level of suspicion if a priest was to take a parish because they wanted to change it, knowing that their preferences were incompatible totally with that parish. That you can take a place and discern a need for change, but you actually have to belong to that yourself already at a core level. So then, from looking at all these common threads, we come to a level of takeaways or implications. Of course, all the priests express that need to be true to yourself. When leading the liturgy, when changing the liturgy, or determining the needs of the worshiping community, you, as the leader of worship, need to be true to what it is that feeds you as well. And of course, on the other hand, the needs of the community, for all of them, are what comes first. For all of them, there was a sense of identity as well, that a parish must know who they are. And it doesn't have to be a pigeonhole or small, but you have to have an idea of why is it that we worship this way? What is it about it that feeds us? What does it actually say about what we believe? All of them insisted on being cooperative, but with a level of firmness, using that fact that you do, as the priest, carry a level of authority over the liturgy. But like the one priest said, you can't carry a big stick. You have to walk humbly, before your people in order to achieve that. And also as well, one of the big takeaways was that there was no right timeline. That was one of the things that was also unique to everyone. Some started changes right away. Some of them went quick, some went slow. Some waited years before starting. Continuing with the takeaways, it was important for all of them to find a balance. Some of them had not enough variety and needed more. Some had too much variety and needed less. There was a real sense of stability that is always needed in the worship life of a parish, that rhythm that needs to be developed. Of course, they all emphasized praying and discernment as part of this process. And they emphasized that it's a positive experience if done with love. Priest 4 really put this beautifully as well when talking about when he took that step to kind of put his foot down and say, I think this is the identity we need to embrace. He made it clear that this is the identity that I've discerned this because I love all of you dearly. And I want to see you be happy. And I think that this is what you love as well. And like I said, these results are more qualitative than quantitative, at least for Anglicans. There was not, a massive revival that happened in the parish and it became a mega church. But there was rejuvenation of the people who were there and a strengthening of the community. And then kind of lastly, although I said I wasn't going to talk about specifics, all of them told me, do not change the Lord's Prayer. All of them at one time, I tried the contemporary Lord's Prayer, and all of them found that people said, I do not like you changing the Lord's Prayer. And that was their biggest sticking point. So they recommended keep the traditional Lord's Prayer, kind of regardless of what service you end up using. So further questions I think that are brought up by my research, of course, is what is the experience of liturgical change for lay people, right? I mean, it would have been great, and I would have loved to interview lay people from these parishes to see how they perceived it. But that would have been too big of a project for this kind of thing. That could have been good on a one parish case level study. And all the priests said this as well. Are you going to ask the people what they think? I said, well, no, that's not what this is about. But I thought it was good that they cared. And of course, there's the question of how does liturgical change impact the community? We saw a lot of positive examples here, but I know that it's not always positive. And so then how should liturgical change be done? If it's going to be done, how can you do it in a way that's positive? I do think what we've taken away from here of cooperative leadership, of humility, of prayerfulness, of putting the community first is definitely giving us a roadmap for that. But a more actual quantitative study, I think, could be helpful. And then, of course, there's always that question of, well, is there a specific liturgical movement happening in the church that is happening for a reason? That is a good thing. Or is diversity the case, the reason that it exists? Is there a reason behind that, right? So I'll just end with thank you for listening to that. That is the end of my presentation.